YouTube live stream will now begin. Good morning. This hearing will now come to order of the Agriculture, Rural Development, Food and Drug Administration and Related Agencies Subcommittee. As this hearing is fully virtual, we have to address a few housekeeping matters. For today's hearing, the chair or staff designated by the chair may mute participants' microphones when they're not under recognition for purposes of eliminating inadvertent background noise. Members are responsible for muting and unmuting themselves. If I notice that you have not unmuted yourself, I will ask you if you would like the staff to unmute you. If you indicate approval by nodding, then the staff will unmute your microphone. I remind all members and witnesses that the 5-minute clock still applies. If there is a technology issue, we will move to the next member in order until the issue is resolved, and you will retain the balance of your time. You'll notice a clock on your screen that will show how much time is remaining. At 1 minute remaining, the clock will turn yellow. At 30 seconds remaining, I will gently tap the gavel to remind members that their time is almost expired. When your time has expired, the clock will turn red, and I will begin to recognize the next member. In terms of speaking order, we will begin with the chair and ranking member, then alternating between majority and minority, with members present at the time the hearing starts in order of seniority. After that, members not present at the time the hearing starts will be recognized in the order that they join. Finally, House rules require me to remind you that we have set up an email address to which members can send anything they wish to submit in writing at any of our hearings or markups. That email address has been provided in advance to your staff. Last reminder, please ensure that your video is turned on at this time. Well, I'd like to welcome everyone to today's hearing on this very, very important topic. Our witness today is Dr. Mary Dennigan McCauley, and she's been at the Government Accountability Office since 2001 and has a wealth of knowledge on the issues that we will be discussing today. We look forward to hearing from you, and we thank you for your close attention and your hard work to highlight this issue. Today, 3/4 of the supply of active pharmaceutical ingredients and about half of the supply of finished doses in the U.S. market are produced overseas. In the past, the FDA focused on hitting inspection targets to ensure certain facilities were being inspected on a predictable schedule. The rapid and continued growth in foreign facilities has made it impossible to continue this approach. FDA now employs a risk-based model for selecting and prioritizing its inspections. The past 30 years have brought tremendous growth in the global pharmaceutical market. The GAO has been studying the FDA's foreign drug inspections program for nearly that entire period. And since 2009, GAO has placed FDA's ability to oversee the global pharmaceutical supply chain, which includes the Foreign Drug Inspections Program, on its high-risk list. This is unacceptable. The highest priority of the FDA is to ensure the safety and efficacy of medical products. The countless Americans who depend on life-saving drugs each day should not have to worry about whether that drug was produced in a dangerous or unsafe facility. I've been very troubled by recent news reports about the dangers of tainted drugs and unacceptable manufacturing practices coming from overseas. Instances of contaminants making their way into blood pressure medications, reports from inspectors who have observed paper shredding campaigns, and descriptions of inspectors playing a cat and mouse game with foreign manufacturers intent on hiding problems paints a very frightening picture of the global health of our drug supply. Inspections are some of our most valuable tools in the fight against fraud, and it sounds like we have got to do a better job. Now, GAO has really studied this issue um, since 1998, and weaknesses in the FDA oversight of foreign drug manufacturers has become even more concerning because FDA now estimates that 74% of our active pharmaceutical ingredients, which are the primary ingredients in our drugs, and over 54% of the finished doses, which are the tablets, the capsules, and the pills that contain the active pharmaceutical ingredients that are taken by patients, that those are manufactured overseas. 40% of all foreign plants exporting drugs to the US are in India and China. While most foreign inspections in those countries, uh, FDA found that those plants receive significantly lower scores for quality on average than the EU or US plants. According to analysis conducted by the GAO, 60% of foreign inspections are classified as voluntary action indicated. Note that although the corrective actions are voluntary, it means that there's still issues in those plants. There are really, really serious issues in our inspections of foreign plants. While the domestic inspections are almost always conducted on an unannounced basis, the majority of foreign plants receive notice of the inspection as much as 12 weeks in advance. In addition, the foreign inspections typically involve weeks of on-site work. This raises questions about whether there's parity between foreign and domestic inspections and what sorts of issues FDA may not be catching when it comes to foreign facilities. FDA relies on the manufacturers, the companies, for translation services in many instances, and that raises questions about the validity of the translations. There have been allegations as far back as 1993 that the FDA management frequently downgrades the inspector's recommended actions. In 1996, GAO found that 2/3 of the inspector's recommended actions were downgraded. Downgrading for findings is a recurring claim by recent whistleblowers. In May of 2019, the New York Times published an article that called into question the quality, the safety, and the reliability of brand and generic drugs that were made overseas. And it chronicles a former FDA consumer safety officer who found, while he was inspecting foreign manufacturing plants in both China and India between 2012 and 2018, during the course of his years, he discovered fraud and deception in 67 of the 86 drug manufacturing plants that he inspected. He routinely uncovered hidden laboratories, fake quality control, defective sterilization machines, toxic impurities. Um, and the article also outlines how from 2013 to 2018, the FDA downgraded the regulatory sanctions against more than 100 Indian plants, changing the designation from official action indicated to voluntary action indicated. NBC in May of 2019 highlighted a different FDA inspector who had also spent time in China and India inspecting manufacturing facilities. One plant in Linhai, China had numerous issues, including anomalies in testing, unknown impurities. And the inspector recommended a warning letter to the facility, which would bar it from gaining approvals to produce new drugs at the facility. The FDA reportedly overruled his recommendation. In December of 2016, GAO reported that a number of foreign drug facilities, that there were a number that had never been inspected. and that about 1 in 3, 1,000 of the approximately 3,000 foreign manufacturing facilities had not been likely inspected. It identified 189 of the 572 facilities in India, 243 of the 535 facilities in China that may never have been inspected. It's very, very frustrating. And according to reports in 2013, the FDA created a pilot program in India to reduce the reliance on pre-announced inspections and to perform more short notice or unannounced inspections. According to the reports of that 2013 experiment, it exposed widespread malfeasance that had otherwise been hidden because of the advanced warning notice system. Among the findings, the inspections found bird infestations, missing samples, fake laboratories, all of which negatively impact drug quality and safety. Under the pilot program, the FDA issued a 60% increase in official action indicated findings. That program was eliminated in 2015, and FDA has never really explained why. So in order to address some of these issues, our FY21 bill included $3.5 million for the FDA to increase efforts to perform the unannounced inspections in India and China. So today, we're here to discuss how the FDA conducts these foreign inspections compared to our domestic ones, how the FDA's inspection efforts have been impacted by COVID-19, and how the FDA can improve its foreign drug inspections program moving forward. To put it simply, we will use what we learned today to keep FDA accountable and, most importantly, to make them do their job. The importance of this task cannot be overstated, considering that nearly all foreign inspections have been on pause since the outbreak of COVID-19. Whether this requires more resources to enhance our domestic manufacturing capabilities, or whether this requires larger investments to deploy more inspectors abroad, or both, I am committed to ensuring that the FDA has the right tools and that it carries out the right policies to address this crisis. The health, safety, and welfare of the American people are at great peril. We have got to strengthen the inspection programs, particularly in China and India, and reduce the practice of providing months' notice. I hope it will become an important tool to help address the inspections issues that have arisen and that are with COVID-19 and beyond. So Dr. Dennigan McCauley, I want to again express my appreciation for your participation today. I look forward to hearing from you about what challenges remain, how we can help improve the foreign drug inspections program moving forward. And at this time, let me ask our distinguished ranking member, my partner, Mr. Fortenberry, if he would like to provide any opening remarks. And if so, and I presume he would, I'd like to recognize him at this time.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Before I begin my own remarks, let me commend you for that passionate, excellent summary of why we are here today. I so appreciate your leadership on this question and so many others. This hearing today is about one thing only. Are our drugs safe? And the COVID pandemic has shown us that we have a much overlooked problem. In the name of global profiteering, we've enabled the outsourcing of pharmaceutical production to foreign countries, a significant portion of it to the very place of origin of the coronavirus in China. Approximately 75%, as was mentioned, of active drug ingredients and 50% of finished drugs on the American market, from ibuprofen to antibiotics, are produced outside of America. Even if we vigilantly inspect, the domestic manufacturing process, we cannot possibly get a handle on drug safety when our drugs are sourced from over 150 countries. There is an inherent and unfair duality, however, in how FDA's foreign and domestic inspections are carried out. It's my understanding that FDA inspectors normally conduct surprise inspections in the United States to ensure that drug companies are producing medicine in a safe, clean, and responsible manner. But as we just heard from our chairman, when it comes to foreign inspections, the FDA customarily gives companies advance notice, often as much as 12 weeks, enabling drug suppliers plenty of time to clean up their act. This is counterproductive and it's wrong, and it creates an unlevel playing field for companies trying to manufacture drugs in the United States. Compounding these problems, FDA inspectors also face obstruction, coercion, and sometimes deception in other places. At the Health and Human Services Inspector General hearing last year, I asked why so much drug production has moved overseas. I already knew the primary answer, of course, to capitalize on low wages and lax environmental safety and labor standards in other countries. My fuller intention was to probe whether or not U.S. law and regulatory structure may perversely encourage offshoring. These troubling dynamics take on a special urgency given what we have gone through this past year with this pandemic. Solving these issues became easier. It will become easier when we fully identify and inspect foreign sources of drugs and drug ingredients. But with the bulk of our foreign drug supply originating from, again, a country that suppressed news about the origin, severity, and timing of COVID-19, I am not very optimistic. Last year, it needs to be pointed out that Chairman Bishop and I worked on a change in the appropriation bill to ensure that FDA has the power to refuse drugs at our border when the agency is not granted sufficient access to information about how medicines are produced in foreign-based facilities. I'm just going to repeat that sentence, Mr. Chairman, because I think it's very important to highlight. Chairman Bishop and I worked on a change in last year's law to ensure that FDA has the power to refuse drugs at the border when the agency is not granted sufficient access to information about how medicines are produced in foreign-based facilities. It's a powerful tool, and I hope it's utilized well. Mr. Chairman, if the pandemic has taught us anything, it's that made in America must apply more than to just our military. America has become inordinately dependent on other countries for the manufacture of many of our pharmaceutical ingredients and final drug products. I'd like to see made in America on the prescription bottle. I'd certainly feel better. With that, Mr. Chairman, I look forward to today's hearing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Fortenberry. At this time, I'm pleased to recognize the chairwoman of the full Committee of Appropriations, the gentlelady from Connecticut, Chair Rosa DeLauro.
Thank you very, very much, Mr. Chair. And let me thank you and Ranking Member Fortenberry for holding this very, very important hearing this morning. And I think it does bear repeating. I want to thank you both for your leadership in this area and what you have done to really to give FDA the authority, if you will, to deny drugs at the border without the transparency that is required. So thank you for being vigorous about this oversight. Let me also say a thank you to Dr. Mary Dennigan McCauley for testifying this morning. You know, when most Americans take a pill out of a medicine cabinet, they may not think twice about where the ingredients in it came from. But as foreign manufacturing of drugs has grown considerably in recent years, it is now estimated that around 80% of all drug ingredients come from foreign countries. Unfortunately, the Food and Drug Administration's Foreign Drug Inspections Program has failed to keep up. As our witnesses will testify today, GAO has studied FDA's oversight of the global pharmaceutical supply chain since 1998, and the results are not good. GAO has included the FDA on its high-risk series since 2009. One of the main problems is that FDA gives foreign drug manufacturers, as has been stated, but not American ones, advance notice of inspections, 12 weeks of advance notice, and that has allowed foreign manufacturers to fabricate or shred data, use hidden laboratories, or secretly repeat tests before the FDA inspectors arrived. By contrast, in unannounced inspections, investigators have found issues the plants were unable to hide. Important manufacturing records tossed in a trash bin, bird and insect infestations, even human urine puddled on the floor. Clearly, that is not a safe or sterile manufacturing area. These shoddy practices result in drugs with unapproved ingredients, toxic impurities, and dangerous particulates making their way into American medicine cabinets. In 2007, 2008, hundreds of Americans died from contaminated heparin, an anticoagulant drug manufactured overseas. In 2018 and 2019, dozens of blood pressure and anti-ulcer drugs were recalled because they contain more than 200 times the acceptable limit of a known carcinogen. But now, because of the pandemic, the FDA has stopped nearly all overseas inspections. And unfortunately, this means the FDA's work to prevent potentially tainted drugs from entering the US is even more difficult. The GAO report was stunning, and that even so that the FDA uses alternative inspection tools to maintain some oversight of drug manufacturing quality while inspections are paused. And the tools rely on inspections conducted by foreign regulators, and requesting and reviewing records and other information and sampling and testing drugs. FDA has determined that inspections conducted by certain European regulators are equivalent to and can be substituted for an FDA inspection. That is wrong, because other tools provide useful information but are not equivalent to what rate of inspection that we deal with at the FDA. And we also know that the GAO reported from fiscal year 2016 to 2018, both foreign and domestic inspections decreased. Today, we are taking a look, and again, I compliment the chair and the ranking member, a closer look at how FDA's inspections have been impacted by this pandemic. Critically, how we can ensure the FDA has the resources that it needs to restart and improve its foreign drug inspections program. Americans trust and rely on these medicines to take care of themselves and their families. Many are sick and vulnerable, and many more are elderly. They should not have to fear whether the drugs they take could make their systems worse or their symptoms worse or even kill them. They should be able to trust that unsafe drugs will never get into their medicine cabinets in the first place. And with that, I thank Chairman Bishop and Ranking Member Fortenberry, and I yield back.
Thank you very much, Chairwoman Laura. I normally recognize the full committee ranking member, Ms. Granger, but I don't believe she has joined us as of yet. If she should join us, we will allow her to give remarks upon her arrival. Dr. Dinnigan McCauley, welcome, and without objection, your entire written testimony will be included in the record. I'll recognize you now for your statement, which I hope you will summarize, and then we will proceed with questions. You can summarize, or you can give the entire statement. It's up to you. But the more time that you leave for questions, I think the better the committee will be able to delve into the issues surrounding this very, very serious crisis. So at this time, I'm delighted to recognize Dr. Dinnigan McCauley for your testimony, please, ma'am, and welcome.
Thank you, and good morning, Chairman Bishop, Ranking Member Fortenberry, Chairwoman DeLauro, and members of the subcommittee, and I am happy to do a summary rather than read the entire statement. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss our work on FDA's Foreign Drug Inspection Program. FDA is responsible for overseeing the safety and effectiveness of drugs marketed in the United States, regardless of where they are produced. Today, the majority of drugs destined for the United States are manufactured overseas. A critical element in FDA's oversight of these drugs is inspections. However, since 1998, as you have pointed out, we have raised concerns about the effectiveness of FDA's oversight of this increasingly global supply chain, including how few inspections FDA had conducted overseas, not knowing how many foreign drug establishments were actually subject to inspection, and persistent vacancies among investigators who conducted the inspections. We also identified unique challenges that influenced the manner in which FDA conducted these inspections overseas, raising questions about their equivalency to those in the United States. For example, as you also mentioned, FDA provided foreign establishments significant notice that an investigator was coming, compared to no notice in the US. And FDA relied on these establishments for translation services, raising questions about the accuracy of the information. In 2009, we added FDA's oversight of medical products to our high-risk series, citing the agency's inability to ensure the quality of drugs manufactured overseas. I am pleased to report that FDA has made some progress over the 2 decades. For example, FDA is gaining a better understanding of which drug establishments are subject to inspection. The agency has also increased the number of overseas inspections, and in fiscal year 2015, for the first time, the number of foreign inspections surpassed domestic, with 40% in India and China, better reflecting where manufacturing is occurring. While we applaud the progress, challenges remain. For example, as we learned from investigators and on our site visits to India and China just prior to the pandemic, FDA continues to rely on the establishments for translations and still provides up to 3 months advance notice for most of these, giving manufacturers the chance to fix problems before an investigator even arrives. In addition, investigators have little flexibility to extend their time at a facility to follow leads due to back-to-back inspections, and they are often alone inspecting massive manufacturing campuses. Further, since its peak in 2016, the number of inspections have generally declined, which FDA attributed in part to inspector vacancies. Moreover, since March of 2020, citing concerns for the safety of its employees during the pandemic, FDA has now largely paused foreign and domestic inspections, only conducting a handful of what the agency deemed mission critical. FDA has used alternative inspection tools to maintain some oversight of drug manufacturing quality during this pause. These tools include relying on inspections conducted by foreign regulators, reviewing establishment records, and testing drugs at the border. While these tools can provide useful information, most do not substitute for an inspection, and FDA will face a backlog as it was unable to complete more than 1,000 of its planned inspections for fiscal year 2020. In January, we recommended that FDA make plans to address this backlog and assess how alternative tools can be used to augment or replace inspections. FDA concurred with both. The globalization of drug manufacturing presented FDA with new challenges, many of which have been exacerbated by the pandemic. While the agency has taken steps to adapt, further action will be needed to ensure it can continue to fulfill its oversight responsibilities in the future. Thank you, Chairman Bishop, Ranking Member Fortenberry, and members of the subcommittee for holding this important hearing. This concludes my prepared remarks. I am happy to respond to any questions you may have.
At the time
Mr.
the hearing
Bishop.
starts in order of seniority. After that, I will recognize members who were not present at the time the hearing was called to order. Each member will have 5 minutes in each round, so please be mindful of your time. At this time, I will yield to myself for the first round of questions. I tell you what, I will defer my questions to the chair of the full committee, Mr. Lara, and I will follow Mr. Fortenberry, who will follow Mr. Lara.
Thank you very, very much, Mr. Chairman. And thank you for your testimony. My understanding, and I think there's something that the chairman asked about, that the FDA's process for conducting surveillance inspections rely on risk-based models. I would just say that I've long been a skeptic of risk-based models for oversight and inspection, dating back to my time as chair of this subcommittee, when I opposed the plans to implement that practice at the Department of Agriculture. The central problem to risk-based inspection models is that the overall model is only as good as the data used to create that model. And I would note that Congress and the American public have limited information on FDA's risk-based inspection model for foreign drug facilities. A lack of transparency is very concerning to me. We don't know the proportion of inspections that take place relative to the overall number of registered foreign facilities. This makes it difficult to evaluate FDA's overall work in inspecting foreign drug facilities. Dr. Dennigan-McCauley, what steps would you have the FDA take in order to increase transparency, not only of how they determine the basis to conduct risk-based inspection, but also to shed more light on foreign inspections overall?
Thank you for the question. And you're absolutely right. The inputs that go into any model, whether it's a risk-based or one for surveillance on COVID-19, those inputs are absolutely vital. And the model is only as good as those inputs. And so as I had mentioned, FDA does not have a good understanding of the denominator. They need to know how many plants need to be inspected. So without knowing what those manufacturing establishments are, that's absolutely critical. And in fairness to FDA, it is a challenge because a lot of the manufacturing establishments want to register even if they don't ship to the United States because it looks an appearance of being approved by FDA. So they do have some challenges ahead of them related to that. But you're right, there's no reason that they can't share about how they go ahead and select those models.
Mm-hmm. What can we do, though, as to really an examination of this risk-based model? What can we do as this subcommittee, as a Congress, to really deal with turning this around so that we can get an accurate picture? What is necessary?
Well, as I mentioned, they need to make sure that they can get the bottom line. We need to know how many are subject to inspection. Then they need to actually be able to go out and get those inspections done and fill those vacancies so that those inspections can be completed. Also, we have right now with this backlog, FDA has put the onus on itself to deem what is mandatory to do. And that mandatory means that they will go to those plants that have never been inspected or those plants that haven't been inspected in the last 5 years. And given the backlog, they may want to go back and reassess that. And that's part of our recommendation is how you're going to clear the backlog so that you can hit the riskiest plants.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. You said that they've made some progress, but as I read the report, it would appear that 9 times out of 10, and maybe that's a slight exaggeration, but they don't adhere to the recommendations. So given that it appears it falls on deaf ears. So what should we, again, as the Congress do to rectify the situation, ensure that oversight and safety, the safety of products, the safety of those products that the public depends on? What kind of regulations, what kind of oversight, what should we be doing as the Congress and this subcommittee to address that issue of not following the recommendations?
I think that sustained attention, like holding the hearing that you're doing, asking GAO to continue to do the work to see the progress that they've made, seeing what steps they're taking to get off the high risk to address the problems that we found are all very critical. And importantly, as you mentioned, doing unannounced inspections overseas.
High risk, do we need to challenge the FDA on this continuous being on a high risk list since 2009? What does that say is our responsibility to really go after the FDA? How can you be on a high risk list since 2009 on drugs and drug inspections that are there to save the lives of the American people?
FDA could be more transparent on the amount of appropriations that they need for the inspections if necessary.
Well, my time is run out, so I will yield back. But it seems like we have serious issues with the oversight and bringing the FDA to task on these issues. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, the ranking member.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. At this time, let me recognize Mr. Fortenberry for his questions in the first round.
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman, for calling this very important hearing, and I appreciated the comments of our chair, DeLauro, as well. Dr. Dennigan-McCauley, thank you for your appearance today. Let's start out with the simple question that I offered in my opening statements. Are our drugs safe?
So the FDA is well regarded around the world. So I think Americans can take comfort in the fact that we do have one of the best systems in the world.
Would you give FDA's performance a grade?
It's challenging because our work is ongoing, because it has improved. It's certainly not the failing grade that we would have given it 2 decades ago.
Okay, let me lean into that a little heavier. What grade do they get? A, B, C, D, or F? Obviously not F. What grade would you give them?
The fact that inspections are going down and they have continued oversight problems overseas, I think at best we could say they are at a C, where they are maintaining their ability to have information overseas, but significant challenges remain.
Okay, so fair enough. I know you're probably loath to categorize things that simply, but I think this kind of construct helps us understand where we are in order to get us to where we ought to be. Our chair, DeLauro, leaned into this a little heavily, but I want to go back to it. What are the 3 things that the FDA needs to do to get an A grade? And let me follow up, or you may want to integrate into your answer what you had referred to earlier as alternative tools to augment inspections.
Yeah. So most importantly, they have got to figure out how to fill their vacancies. Even if you poured more money at them, I don't think that would solve the problem, because they're having a challenge getting investigators to even do the work, number one. Also, as we recommended, they need to look at these alternative tools and determine how they can either augment inspections or take the place of inspections. And if they need additional authorities, they need to let you know.
What are those additional tools? Define that, please.
So, for example, they can do testing at the border. They've also done document request. They've relied on mutual recognition agreements, but they don't know the extent to all of these tools, their ability to actually substitute for an inspection, and if additional authorities are needed to.
Are we doing testing at the border?
We are.
Currently?
We are.
And now, as I'd mentioned in our statement, Chairman Bishop initiated, and I was fully supportive of stopping drugs at the border. Should we be concerned about the lack of inspections overseas? I want to simply highlight that.
So they are doing inspections at the border. Typically, though, because of the huge volume that's coming in, it's not very many. They simply don't have the capacity to test everything. And that really only tells you the quality of the drugs, but it gives you some information.
Has the FDA ever considered giving a grade to companies?
It's interesting you raised that, because of course on the slaughterhouses side, they have discussed being able to do that and posting the bad actors. And I don't know the extent to which FDA has considered giving a grade to the bad actors on the drug side.
Would you recommend that?
Well, it certainly helps enforce compliance. We haven't done work, but I mean, we see that in the restaurant business. I mean, it's right there when you walk in a restaurant, you can see it's in daycares, whether they pass or fail.
What do you think about country of origin labeling?
So I have not done any recent work on country of origin labeling, so I really can't comment on that.
Okay, so let's go back to the previous question. If companies were giving a grade, obviously the public would have to have some access to that. How could you see that unfolding?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question again?
Yeah, again, the point of what you were saying, we post inspection notices at daycare and restaurants. The same thing applying to companies who, the point of the question is obviously to force companies to be much more vigilant in they're attracting or invitation openness to the FDA inspection so that it is consistent with their assurance that they need to give the public and therefore their market that they are safe and efficacious. So how could those grades basically be posted?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's certainly a very valuable tool for the consumer. So imagine if the consumer could look and see where all of their ingredients on their drug have come from. The problem is, even if you know where that finished drug came from, we don't have enough information knowing where all the different individual ingredients are coming from. So country of origin labeling for a drug would be extremely challenging to do. But of course, if you have the ability and you have the political ability to do it, it would give the consumer better information.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you very much. I yield to myself for 5 minutes. Dr. Dinnigan, let me ask you, obviously the FDA is vastly understaffed and under-resourced when it comes to foreign inspections versus domestic inspections. And while FDA publishes annual data on drug and device inspections, the report is limited, doesn't contain detailed breakdowns showing the number of inspections by centers or by domestic versus foreign. Do you have any data on the number of foreign drug inspectors compared to domestic drug inspectors and the relative budgets of the two activities? And you know, previous GAO reports have noted the challenges that FDA has continued to have filling vacancies and hiring additional staff to conduct their foreign inspections. The FDA released a strategic workforce development plan in 2016 to help recruit and train foreign office staff, but high vacancies haven't improved very much since 2016. Additionally, in June of 2020, FDA testified that it intended to fill all investigator vacancies in 2020. But as of December 2020, investigator vacancies remained. I recognize that foreign inspections present unique bureaucratic and procedural challenges, but it seems that hiring, training, and developing new investigators may not really be a priority at FDA. Do you believe that FDA is accurately assessing and prioritizing its foreign inspection needs?
So that is the basis of our ongoing work. We agree it is absolutely critical that they pay attention and have sustained attention and make it a priority. We will say that on our high-risk list, leadership commitment has been a priority. They have reorganized to better address the threat and how they can do the inspections overseas better. They've also developed strategic plans and they come up with workforce planning. But something isn't quite working, and that's what we're still trying to figure out, because there are still vacancies year after year, and they're not a foreign service department. We want to find out what they're doing to help overcome these very challenging things that they're doing.
Thank you. In your testimony, you discussed some troubling reports, and we've seen news reports that FDA investigators have expressed concerns that FDA has downgraded some of the inspection reports from the most serious assessment being official action indicated to the less serious classification of voluntary action indicated. Is there any hard data on this or any way to identify the instances where this has occurred, and how widespread is this feeling among investigators? We know we've heard from some whistleblowers, but do you have any hard data on this?
Yeah, so that is also part of our ongoing work. We definitely heard of the concerns related to downgrades when we were in China and in India and from other investigators. So we continue to look in this. We did report in 1998 that we found that FDA management frequently downgraded, and FDA themselves testified in June of last year that they have better aligned CDER and ORA reviews, the FDA process for reviewing the downgrades, to help better align. So before they had a 70, I think that they're now, they said that 73% agreement on the classification versus before it was only 50% agreement. So they are working on it, and we're continuing to see how much of a problem it continues to be.
Okay, well, we provided in the last bill $3.5 million to increase short notice or unannounced inspections in China and India. What specific activities do you recommend that FDA focus on when implementing this funding? And will it require hiring more staff?
Yeah, so first of all, they have to fill the vacancies that they have, as we had mentioned, and it could require hiring more staff. Right now, all inspections, because of the pandemic, whether domestic or overseas, are doing full announcements, meaning that they give them the advance notice. So number one, we need to resume doing unannounced inspections here in the United States. We need to, if we're going to do it overseas, determine how that's going to be implemented, and FDA says that they need metrics as well to be able to do that. But importantly, they also need to provide translators. Even if you have an unannounced inspection and you're relying on that establishment for the translations, that's not acceptable.
Thank you very much. My time has now expired. I'm pleased to recognize Mr. Valadeo for any questions that he might have at this time.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Dr. Jonathan McCall. Thank you for testifying today in front of the committee. Glad we were able to reschedule and reading through the testimony, I thought it was concerning the FDA will provide foreign manufacturers with a heads up before inspection. Notification to the manufacturer far in advance seems to defeat the purpose of the exercise, which is more efficient to inspect the facility as is. To take a snapshot from the facility conditions in a moment of time. The report findings included in your testimony go on to state that in light of the FDA is now pre-enact foreign and domestic inspections for the safety of its staff and manufacturers. What is the purpose of pre-announcement? Would you like to expand on how the advanced notification is related to the pandemic and how this action will help ensure proper inspection?
So apologies, I had a little trouble hearing you. If you could repeat the question again.
Oh, okay.
Just the question. I got the gist of what you were talking about.
This is pre-announcement. And I assume that there's got to be a better reason for this. Pre-announcing an inspection of a medical facility, we know that these facilities have to have. We know they have to have the proper PPE enforcement policies when they're manufacturing these dangerous or sometimes medications. Why would we give them a 12-week pre-announcement of an inspection?
So if I heard you correctly,
we're having great difficulty with your audio. I'll ask the staff to consult with you and your staff on the technology, and we'll reserve your time and come back to you when we can repair your audio. It's very difficult, I think, for all of us to hear, and we'd love to hear your questions because I know that they're very insightful. Mr. Pocan.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate it. And thanks for this hearing. And thank you very much, Dr. Dunnigan McCauley, for being here. Appreciate it. Let me try to follow up on something our chairman had asked. He started talking about domestic versus foreign inspections. And did you have a better idea of numbers on that? Because I was just looking at a stat, if I've got this right, 58% of the inspections were foreign facilities, but it sounds like there's a greater percent of facilities overseas than in the US. So does that mean that we're actually inspecting our domestic companies more than the foreign companies, which I think most people would want to make sure that they're also being inspected more aggressively?
Apologies, trouble with the unmute button. So I don't have the data in front of me to know exactly how many of the manufacturing establishments are here versus overseas. We have about 4,200 total that we think. And if I recall correctly, yeah, I don't want to go there. I don't know, but I will get that for you. But importantly, before we were really only conducting the inspections here in the United States. And that's because the law required that they go to the US manufacturers every 2 years. And with the limited resources, it basically meant that there were none left over to be able to go overseas. And so now at least they are changing the way that they do their inspections. And the model says, regardless of your foreign or regardless of your domestic, if you've never been inspected or you haven't been inspected in the last 5 years, you're our top priority because we don't know what risks. You could be a no risk or you know, we just don't know. And then from there, they take that same pool, domestic or foreign, and they say, okay, now with whatever resources are left over, we'll go ahead and inspect those. So the proportion of how they're doing it is much better today.
Gotcha. I really like Mr. Fortenberry's suggestion of the grading, quite honestly, because I think, you know, people would like to know that. I also am pretty amenable to a country of origin as well. I think that would help people because I think often people are concerned, especially because of the last year. It's really been a spotlight on this. The New York Times article today, I think, was pretty damning based on your report, and we appreciate, you know, the work that you've done on that. You know, I don't understand the 12 weeks of advance notice either. That doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. It sounds like you said they're going to be bringing back surprise inspections, but you know, the 12 weeks seems to give people an enormous amount of time to fix errors rather than, you know, really get the input that we need.
When we asked FDA about why they had to give the 12 weeks, and they said that logistically it's so challenging to travel overseas, and we certainly understand those logistics. If any of you have tried to go to remote areas of India, it is very challenging. But we also would contend that, you know, you can use the State Department to help set that up so that you don't flag it for the actual company.
Well, especially since there's certain countries where a lot of this is done, you think you'd almost have a easy footprint already in place in order to inspect. So you would already have that system set up, especially as many years as the FDA should have been able to do this. You know, in the article, one of the things that really stood out was they said that because of this backlog of inspections, there could be shortages of medicines. I know they explicitly talked about a drug, and I apologize, I'm not looking at the screen, I'm trying to find it, a cancer treatment drug. What did you find along those lines?
So for our overseas inspections, we haven't looked specifically at what shortages they may have caused, but that is a concern. If they can't pre-approve some of the drugs, for example, I think that's what the New York Times article was talking about, or manufacturers have critical drugs such as the cancer-related chemotherapy drugs, then they're not going to be able to bring them to market in a timely manner. So shortages are a concern that we will continue to keep our eyes on.
Great, thank you. Well, I think, Mr. Chairman, you know, coming out of this, it's interesting. There seems to be some good bipartisan suggestions on what we can do to improve this. It sounds like for years they haven't been maybe having the best practices that have been kind of unexplainable. And I think, you know, perhaps if there's some efforts we can do in this year's appropriation process, I'd be encouraged to work with others in both sides of the aisle. Again, I think the grading idea is one that I think is especially strong. So I'll yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Pocan. At this time, I'd like to return to Mr. Valadeo, if we can, to let him resume if we have his technical issues resolved. Mr. Valadeo, you are recognized.
Is it better now?
For 4 minutes.
Can you hear me better now or no?
Yes, yes,
Perfect.
I can.
So the question was basically on the 12-week pre-announcement for inspections. I mean, obviously these facilities are manufacturing drugs that we desperately need, and the fact that we're giving a lot of these manufacturers a 12-week pre-announcement, I think allows them the opportunity to maybe hide some things that we probably should know about their manufacturing process.
Yeah, and what I would add to that is that FDA would say that they want to make sure that the establishment is going to be open and that people are going to be there and that the documents are ready. But again, that's not what we do here in the United States. And so we want that equivalency.
All right. And then in FDA's fiscal year 2021 appropriation amount of $3.5 million was intended to be used for foreign unannounced drug inspection pilots. As you referenced in your testimony just last month, FDA officials informed you that they would be pronouncing all domestic and foreign inspections. Can you confirm whether or not FDA is using funds meant for unannounced inspections instead of pre-announced inspections? Those sound like two very different things to me, and I am concerned about how they were using or potentially misusing these funds.
So that's part of our ongoing work. So I don't have a direct answer other than to say that right now they're not doing everything is pre-announced because of the concern for the safety, and they have not decided yet when they're going to go back. So I would anticipate that none of the funds are being used at this time.
All right. So just yeah, I'm going to yield back the rest of my time right now.
With the cocaine. There's two Democrats. No, one.
Mr. Chairman,
Cocaine.
I'm yielding back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And the staff advised me who is next in the queue. I believe it's on the Democrat side.
They're saying Newhouse.
Pardon?
They're saying Newhouse. I said next to him, they said Newhouse.
Okay, Mr. Newhouse.
Sorry. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me okay? Okay. Well, I appreciate that. And I'm juggling another meeting, so I apologize for being distracted. But thank you, Director Denigan McCauley. Appreciate your testimony today and joining us about this very important subject. Just could you help those of us and people that may be listening understand how critical this issue is? For instance, not that I did, but say I had taken an ibuprofen this morning just to help with some of those aches and pains in the morning. Tell me where those pills likely came from, and have they been inspected? Do I have confidence that they are what they should be?
Yeah, so I think, I'm a consumer as well. And when I go and take a pill, I don't look to see where it's manufactured. I just assume it's going to be safe. Whether it's a generic or a brand name drug, I make the assumption that it is going to be safe. And so the FDA has a very, very important responsibility to ensure the safety of those. I think that drugs, like food, most people would be surprised to know that very few can actually be inspected just because of the huge volume and in the increase in globalization. So FDA really has taken on a risk-based approach to ensure that they are safe. And thankfully, since heparin, we haven't had a major where a plant hasn't been inspected and then a drug got to the United States and killed people.
But many of those over-the-counter medications do come from out of the country, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Good. So you talked about the process, and in your position as from the GAO, making sure things are happening. One of the challenges, or several challenges, including travel, language, vacancies. Are you seeing problems with recruitment for new inspectors?
Yes, so the FDA has been challenged and has had vacancies really since the beginning they've done with the foreign offices. But what's important is the pool of investigators come from the domestic base, and they have to have experience before they can then go overseas. And so even if they were to fill all of the vacancies today, it's going to be a couple of years before they're even ready to begin to consider doing the overseas inspections.
So that leads me to another question then. Is there any way to speed up that timeline, shorten that 2 to 3 year, I guess it's a training period or whatever it is that they're doing? Are there recommendations that you can bring to FDA to, not compromise or lessen the quality of the inspections, but to help speed up that process?
Yeah, so that's part of what our ongoing review is about. So for example, just hypothetically, I mean, could you take someone who's newer, but could speak Mandarin, for example, to go over to China and have virtual inspections, have someone else participate virtually from home so that that individual is, number one, not alone, and then has the microbiologist or whatever the expertise is that they need there. So those are the kind of things that we are looking at to see how creatively are they thinking.
Okay. Well, again, I appreciate very much your input here, and it's an important topic, and we'll continue to pay attention and listen to the results that you come up with. And Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for holding this hearing, and I'll yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Newhouse. At this time, I'm delighted to recognize the gentlelady from Illinois, Ms. Underwood. Ms. Underwood, you are recognized for your questions.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to Dr. Dunnigan McCauley for being here. As of May 2020, nearly 3/4 of facilities producing active pharmaceutical ingredients for the U.S. market were located outside of the United States. That means that every day, American lives depend on the ability of the FDA to carry out rigorous foreign drug inspections. Like so many federal agencies, the FDA has been forced to alter its standard operating procedures over the course of the past year. For the Foreign Drug Inspection Program, this means almost all facility inspections have been suspended. In place of inspections of foreign manufacturers, FDA is using its other tools to inspect the safety of the U.S. drug supply. Specifically, in a June 2020 testimony, FDA officials described tools such as denying entry of unsafe products into the U.S., physical examinations, or product sampling at our borders, reviewing a firm's previous compliance history, using information sharing from foreign governments with whom FDA has existing agreements, and requesting records in advance or in lieu of on-site drug inspections. Dr. Dunnigan McCauley, in your June 2020 testimony before the Senate Finance Committee, you stated that, quote, the lack of foreign inspections removes a critical source of information about the quality of drugs manufactured for the U.S. market, end quote. Can you describe the elements of foreign inspections that are critical to ensuring the safety of our nation's drug supply, but cannot be fulfilled through alternative tools like the ones FDA officials described in their testimony?
Yes, so when part of the work that we've done, we have not only read all of the laws and regulations, but we've actually gone over and shadowed and talked to the FDA investigators to see what exactly it is they do. And it is a daunting job, and it's not something that can just be deemed from a document review. They walk in, for example, and you look at just the overall manufacturing plant. Do the employees wash their hands, for example, when they use the laboratory? Do they actually don the proper PPE? Are there, I remember looking specifically, if you see a mouse bait or a rat trap inside a manufacturing establishment, you're going to be worried. Why is that? Why is it if you can see, for example, bird poop and anything like that, whether it's a food establishment, a drug establishment, they are supposed to be manufactured, particularly for drugs, under good manufacturing quality. So they are there to check all of those things and not just look at, the data, the temperature, the documents.
Yep, showing up and being there is important. The COVID-19 pandemic has unquestionably created new and anticipated challenges for the FDA's Foreign Drug Inspection Program. But many of the most serious challenges that Dr. Dunnigan McCauley identified in her testimony predated the pandemic. For example, as of December 2019, the Food and Drug Administration had 190 investigators in the US who conduct the majority of foreign inspections, but an additional 58 positions were vacant. Dr. Denikin McCauley testified that the FDA was in the process of filling 26 of those vacancies, but also noted that it could take, quote, 2 to 3 years before new staff are experienced enough to conduct foreign inspections, end quote. Of course, with postponed foreign and domestic surveillance facility inspections over the past year, new staff might have missed opportunities to gain necessary experience. Dr. Denikin McCauley, can you provide an update on staffing shortages within the FDA's Foreign Drug Inspection Program, including a description of how the COVID-19 pandemic might have exacerbated existing workforce challenges?
Yeah, and again, that is something that we continue to work on. We do have serious concerns that the pandemic will exacerbate any kind of fulfilling those vacancies, particularly for those working in the foreign offices, because a lot of individuals are now fearful of traveling and being stationed in India and China. So that is something that we're looking at. We do know that the vacancies continue, and we will shortly be reporting out on where they stand on that.
Well, I certainly look forward to continuing the critical work of our subcommittee to ensure that the Foreign Drug Inspection Program is delivering the results the American people depend on. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to our witness, and I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Underwood. At this time, I'm delighted to yield to the former chair of this subcommittee, the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Robert Adderholt. Mr. Adderholt.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's good to be with the committee today virtually. And I just wanted to follow up on some, we had talked a little bit about the postponed inspections and the impact, and I want to focus a little bit more on the impact. In your testimony, as has been mentioned, you state that FDA was unable to complete more than 1,000 of its planned fiscal year 2020 inspections, a 60% decrease in foreign inspections, and will likely face a backlog for inspections in future years. My question is, could you generally tell us regarding these postponed inspections that what that means for the real world for companies with potential products when FDA isn't able to inspect their facilities?
Yeah, so it could have an impact on the pre-approvals for new drugs. Antimicrobial resistance is a concern. Being able to ensure that we have new drugs entering the market is absolutely critical. We have new drugs that are entering the market also for COVID and longer term down the road. So that would be important, as well as it has an impact on ensuring that the drugs that are already out there are safe. And we want to ensure that they continue to be safe. So getting rid of the backlog is very critical.
And could you talk a little bit more about what your understanding of FDA's plan is to address the backlog?
So they haven't given us, they agreed with our recommendation that they need to assess. In July, they're going to assess how they're going to do the next round, next year's inspections. And so they agreed that they would take a look at it, understand if any of the alternative tools can be further expanded to help address that backlog. And also if they can increase their hiring, then that will also help to reduce the backlog as well. But as it stands right now, we remain very concerned that they're not going to have additional resources to be able to reduce that backlog. So perhaps they have to come up with a different way of looking at what they consider the most important ones to get done first to ensure the safety of our supply.
And your testimony states that as of November 2020, FDA officials told us that the agency had not experienced a significant effect on approval decisions due to the COVID-19 inspection pause. Did GAO speak with industry representatives about the impact of FDA's inspection pause on these approval decisions?
So we did. We spoke with associations representing these manufacturers, and they said that while it's true that the impact may not be felt immediately because the inspections for pre-approvals are done several months prior, as the pandemic goes on, it's going to have more and more of an impact as we go forward.
Did the industry representatives that GAO spoke with have the same view as the FDA did?
They had the same view that GAO did, that there will be an impact as the pandemic goes along, if I'm understanding correctly.
Okay. And then the committee approved a $5 million increase in FY16, and then another 2.5 million in FY17 for high-risk inspections. Part of this increase went toward a process to discover the real inventory of companies manufacturing drugs and other products overseas, in particular in China and India. Firms are supposed to register with the FDA, but many are not, were not registering at all. Can you tell us about the FDA's current inventory of these companies and the basis of their surveillance and their inspection program, and has that improved at all?
Yes, so fortunately, we have seen an improvement in what they call their baseline catalog of understanding which establishments, should be registered and need to be inspected. They have used through a contracting process, they've been able to identify which companies are real. I mean, literally, you need someone to either go knock on the door. So some of the foreign drug inspectors over in the foreign offices, for example, in China, they've been helping to validate whether or not a company is real, or they can do it through a contracting company that has other technical electronic ways of verifying the whereabouts. So it has gotten better.
In your opinion, does additional funding need to be, should there be additional funding? And, just what your thoughts, input on that would be?
I don't have further information at this time. It's something that we continue to look at on the catalog denominator and knowing if they have a sufficient.
Okay. All right. I think my time's up. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Adderholt. At this time, I'm happy to recognize the co-chair of the Steering and Policy Committee and the chair of the Foreign Ops Subcommittee of our Appropriations Committee, the gentlelady from California, Ms. Barbara Lee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for this hearing, very important hearing to get this information out to the public. So many layers to unpeel with this. Dr. Denigan McCauley, thank you so much for your testimony, for being here. And I wanted to ask you about the impact of the backlogs on people living with HIV. Although the United States is expected to see an increase in the number of generic antiretroviral drugs, they continue to come off patent, and there are barriers right now in terms of access and their availability on the market. Only a small percentage of people living with or vulnerable to HIV are dependent on generic ARV drug products manufactured internationally. And so now, with a growing, robust generic competition, the percentage of generic ARV drug products manufactured internationally, that's really expected to grow in the coming months, but potentially not if the inspection bottlenecks delay the entry of these generic drugs. Biomedical interventions, including generic ARVs, are providing consumers with more options and really spurring competition in this overall process, which may ultimately lead to the reducing of new HIV diagnoses in the U.S. So I just wanted to ask you about the potential impact of the inspection backlog on emerging generic drug markets for diseases that have historically required the use of high-branded prescription drugs, including specifically the HIV treatment and prevention drugs.
Yes. Well, I don't have information specific to HIV. What I can tell you is that the backlog would include for pre-approvals for any kind of a new drug, whether it's a brand name drug or a generic. So the concern is very real. However, the one good news about pre-approvals is that for some circumstances, for example, FDA could determine that without an inspection that they would be able to approve that drug if, for example, there's a need, if they've had a good inspection history. Another regulator has recently been there that FDA has a mutual recognition agreement with. So there are some cases, but for the vast majority, they'd be in the same boat and would be part of the backlog.
Let me just ask you on virtual inspections, this is very intriguing to me. How do we make sure that virtual inspections are of quality? And what processes are you establishing so that these virtual inspections don't really compromise the safety and efficacy of the drugs?
Yeah, well, it's a good question because I think the first thing the FDA needs to do is define what a virtual inspection is. At the moment, there's not even agreement. A virtual inspection right now could be defined as, well, I'm reviewing records. And another company may say, well, another regulator may say, a virtual inspection is actually using a camera and going in. And so I would hope, and as our work continues, looking as FDA does their assessment on the other tools, what are other regulators doing? They're not the only regulators in the world, and they can even think outside the box and not just look at drugs. You have regulators regulating a lot of different things, and how are they continuing to do their work in light of the pandemic with virtual inspections?
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for this hearing, Mr. Chairman. It's so important. Thank you, Dr. Denigan McCauley, for your responses.
Thank you, Ms. Lee. At this time, I'm happy to recognize Dr. Andy Harris of Maryland.
Thank you very much, and thank you for an important topic. Let me talk a little bit about China, because China is one of the largest manufacturers of pharmaceuticals. And is it my impression, do you know, are most of the large pharmaceutical companies in China state-owned enterprises?
I don't know that.
Okay, well, I know Sinopharm is, and I know a couple of others are, and that gives me, a great deal of concern because obviously, at least a couple of times in the past, there have been issues about the Chinese government issuing travel visas to our inspectors who want to go to China. And obviously, a state-owned enterprise where the state controls travel visas, makes this an obvious conflict of interest. Could you comment what's the state right now? Because I have talked to an FDA inspector who is very concerned about our access in general to Chinese facilities. And of course, it would start with the visa process. Is that an issue now about Chinese travel visas?
Yeah, so we did look at this extensively when we were in China a few years ago on the food side. There was a lot of concern. First of all of the investigators used to have various offices throughout China. And not only were they unable to get the visas, but then they made all of the investigators move up to Beijing, so they're centrally located. So there have been some concerns in China. I know that actually the president had to step in and help with that visa issue over in China. I believe that the situation has been resolved, but I have not taken a deeper dive to know where we stand on that today. But visas, I mean, it certainly is a way of controlling who's in and who's out.
Now, beyond visas, my understanding is that we give more advance notice for foreign inspections than we do domestic inspections in general. And I understand sometimes it's getting people to the country, but to me, that creates a kind of a double standard. And as we try to move pharmaceutical production back into the United States, that would seem to make it much easier to do production overseas. What's your impression? I mean, first of all, is that true in general that the foreign inspections are announced further in advance? And if that is, how do we level the playing field as we go to bring some of that manufacturing back to the United States?
So absolutely. Pre-pandemic, now all of the inspections are pre-announced both at US and overseas for the safety. But pre-pandemic and hopefully going forward, the idea is to go back to more of a normal state and not pre-announce in the United States. We have had long-standing concerns about the pre-announcement. Giving 3 months notice is just not acceptable. And it does exactly what you're saying. It makes them not equivalent. So why would you want to move your manufacturing to the United States where it's more expensive, you have more environmental regulations, you have more scrutiny, more oversight here in the US than you do overseas?
So what's the potential solution to that? I mean, I don't know how we get around that, or do we just admit that, well, this is not going to be a level playing field, and maybe the safety of drugs being imported from a country like China are just not going to be as safe?
Well, we can't control what the workers paid overseas. That's for one, and we can't control. But what we can do, FDA is looking at what they call advanced manufacturing, to be smarter about the way we manufacture, to have a shorter manufacturing process, which clearly would then reduce the total cost. It would reduce our environmental footprint, which would bring down your EPA regulations. And so there are some things that FDA is looking at that we also have ongoing work. How can we stabilize our medical supply chain, and how can part of that be bringing some of that manufacturing home?
So you've mentioned that during COVID, that in some foreign countries we kind of depend on the local regulators in some areas. So my particular question in China is, did we depend upon Chinese regulators to provide some of the inspection? And again, since these Chinese regulators are state regulators and these Chinese companies are state-owned enterprises, is that an issue when we look to deeming local regulation equivalent to an FDA regulation?
So the only regulators that can be deemed equivalent to the United States are 28 regulators in the European Union. And the only expansion that they've done of that is to allow them to not just do inspections in Europe, but then other countries. So if they happen to do an inspection in China, that it's an approved European, during the pandemic, they are allowing that under certain circumstances.
So we do not allow the Chinese state inspectors to substitute. Great. Okay, thank you very much. I yield back.
Thank you, Dr. Harris. At this time, I'm happy to recognize the gentlelady from Minnesota, the chair of the Defense Subcommittee of Appropriations, Ms. Betty McCollum.
Thank you. There's been a lot of talk about 12-week review, 1-week review notice before an inspection. Having worked in the private sector at a large company, Sears Roebuck, we would have people come in, quote unquote, from the tower from Chicago. I'll tell you, the more advanced notice, the more we did to get ready. And so when anybody came in from the tower or even our region to look at the work that we were doing in the store, whether it was the restroom, the stock room, or the floor, it looked radically different than it did day to day. So any advance notice really changes the character of what goes on in any facility one day. It included us dusting the top of refrigerators, something we never did unless we knew we had company coming. We've talked a lot about drugs and foreign inspections, but I wanna ask you some other questions because you've been also asked about food. Cosmetic products made overseas are supposed to have the same regulatory standards that those made in the United States. And we could get into even how those are inspected here at home and the standards that we have. But the FDA has very limited resources in doing any of the cosmetic inspections. In fact, a letter from 2017 from the FDA to the Energy and Commerce Chair Frank Pallone states that 2.9 million cosmetic products imported in FY16, the most recent year we have data for, was under 1%. Under 1% were physically inspected. Of those products, that were physically inspected, 15% had adverse findings. So 1% of the product, 15% of adverse findings. The FDA, as an organization, has released consumer warnings in the past, including for the dangers of mercury and skin lightening products, an issue that's of intense discussion right now in my district, especially for young women of color who have taken leadership on this issue. But many of those are purchased even over the internet. So ensuring that products come to the US are made in state facilities and they're safe is becoming more difficult. And I just want to, for the committee, we sometimes forget that the skin is the largest organ in our body. And everything that we put on our skin is absorbed into our system, and it can affect our health, not only from skin irritation, but from liver, from all kinds of neurological. I won't get into all the problems it could cause because I'll run out of time to get an answer. But it's really important that we address this. So as we're looking at inspections and more products now coming from China, can you enlighten us with any information you might have as to how cosmetics become involved, especially some of the skin lightening creams and others that we know have had recalls and have had tremendous effects on people's health? Thank you.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I don't have any recent work the GAO has done on cosmetics, but I do know that FDA, as you had mentioned, has an inspection program of the cosmetic manufacturers, but it's far fewer than we do for drugs, and they are mostly domestic. They're not looking at overseas, and cosmetics, I assume, would be increasingly global, just like the drug supply. So, for example, in 2019, they only conducted 73 domestic and 2 foreign.
Wow. Well, we'll leave it at that, Mr. Chair. I know Ms. Ming and I have talked about this before, and I'm sure there's others on the committee on both sides of the aisle who would like to work with us on this. But Mr. Chair, with your leadership, I'd like to spotlight this and figure out how we can work together to make sure that products that we put on our largest organ, our skin, is safe for consumption, especially for the young women who are being marketed to. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, and we certainly look forward to working with you collaboratively on that. At this time, still in our first round, I recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Cuellar.
Chairman, thank you so much, and to the ranking member, both of y'all, thank you so much for holding this meeting. And thank you again to our witness for being here. I want to follow up on whether we have enough people at the border to do the testing by FDA. I'll give you one example of my hometown of Laredo. We handle 16,000 trailers a day, every single day. We also have about 20-something trains a day that come in, and we want to make sure that we have enough inspectors at the border and to make sure we have the right policy. Let me give you one example. Hand sanitizers, and we know there's been a problem with hand sanitizers. The problem has been that FDA, as those hand sanitizers come in, the custom brokers, those are the people that handle the paperwork for the shipper and for the person that wants to buy it. They get down to the border, for example, and then they're told by FDA, oh, can't bring them in. So then the shipper doesn't want to deal with them. The person that was going to buy them doesn't want to deal with them. So the broker who's in the middle ends up with this product. And then you have local landfills that don't want to accept this flammable product for destruction. And then they have to send this at the cost of the custom broker who had nothing to do with this, except he's the one that deals with the paperwork, that then has to go through, sometimes, millions of dollars for the destruction. So what these folks are asking is, why can FDA not allow the importers to just return the products back to the country it was manufactured so they can be destroyed there, instead of you letting the middle person, the custom broker, handle this cost, because nobody wants it at that time. So we're trying to find processes to, one, make sure we have enough FDA inspectors, and then if there's an issue, that you don't burden the American business with the cost when it shouldn't be them on that. So I don't know, Mr. Macaulay, that's too much of a very specific question, but it happens in a place like Laredo where we are handling 16,000 trailers a day.
Yeah, the border issue is very complex, and GAO would be happy to work with you if you'd like for us to do work in that particular area. I have visited your Laredo border, and hats off to the inspectors and working with CBP to be able to do what they do. It is quite challenging, so we'd be happy to work with you.
Yeah, and thank you if we can do that. And the other thing, if you can also work with me, is somebody brought up the question about, I think it was Chairman Lee that talked about virtual inspections, because we know there's an issue with language. And there are times where we have to depend on the company to translate. They'll get some English speaking person to translate. And then if you have to translate, interpret, and then if you have to translate documents, that makes it more interesting when you're depending on the establishment to do that interpretation and translation. So what I'm asking on the virtual, there's telemedicine where doctors actually can look at x-rays and look at a lot of things to treat a patient. There's got to be technology out there on the virtual, and if y'all can start looking at some things we can use. I'd rather have inspectors there. I'd rather not have any problems with any visas. I'd rather have the right translator there. But if doctors can do telemedicine, I'm sure we can do some inspections to an extent on that. So I'd like to follow up with you at a later time, and I appreciate it, especially the issue at the border, because 16,000 trailers a day is something we got to handle pretty quickly on that. So appreciate it. We can follow up on that, and we really appreciate the good work that y'all do, and the men and women at the border that deal with this every single day.
Sure, happy to.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Cuellar. For our last member in the first round, I'd like to recognize the gentlelady from New York, Ms. Ming. Ms. Ming, you are now recognized.
Thank you, Chairman Bishop, and thank you to Dr. Denigan McCauley for being here today and for your important work. Two things. One, I did want to follow up and support the questions and concerns of Ms. McCollum on the importance of more and transparent cosmetic inspections, and wanted to add to that products such as feminine hygiene products, and food additives, chemicals, colorants in foods produced for the United States. We had report language last year asking the FDA to help establish good manufacturing practices for cosmetics, for example. So just wanted to reiterate what Ms. McCollum has discussed already. And then my other question is also about recruiting. Wanted to know what efforts and how the FDA recruits its multilingual inspectors. I know we discussed already translation, translators and interpreters that are used oftentimes and provided for by the facility, but just in general, how is recruitment done? What are the top languages that are needed? And if there are maybe potential ways that we can work further with other agencies, you mentioned the State Department in relation to travel for inspections, but are there any types of collaborations that we can make with other agencies even? And, how can we just improve that recruiting process specifically for multilingual inspectors?
Yeah, so the recruitment process is challenging for FDA because in the pecking order, basically, State Department is going to have a precedence. And so there are language classes that they can take, but they're not going to have the first priority. There is security training that they need to take, but they don't get the first priority. And so I don't know the exact number of investigators that they would hire with a language ability. To be honest, we're looking at that. I'm not sure that that would even be a requirement. That's not their priority. Their priority is ensuring that they have the ability to do the inspections that are necessary. So they have to have those microbiology skill sets, for example. The other issue is that they can rely, for the few inspectors that are stationed at the China office, for example, and over in India, they do have local staff that can help them with some interpretation and language skills so that they're not having to rely on a translation app. I mean, we heard inspectors saying that, the translator that the company brought wasn't very good, and I was resorted to using my app on my phone. That's just unacceptable. It really is. The other thing is that FDAs, if they don't have the resources or the ability to hire those with the language skills, there are other models that are out there. For example, the European regulators in China come up with a list and they say, okay, here's our list of inspectors that translators that we approve. Company A, you can pick from this list and you pay for it. So there are models that we're going to look at to see how FDA is trying to think outside the box on this very critical issue.
Thank you. Has the GAO ever conducted a study, or will they, on the FDA's workforce recruitment and retention?
Yep, that's our ongoing work. Absolutely. We've been looking at it basically, this whole time, and they do have a workforce plan, but as I mentioned before, something's not working. They have a plan, they're trying to implement it, but they still have serious vacancies.
Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
To Ms. Ming, at this time, we will start our second round, and I'm happy to yield to my ranking member and my partner, Mr. Fortenberry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And again, thank you, Dr. Denigan McCauley. This has been very insightful and informative. I do want to be brief because we're nearing the close of the hearing. But I want to just highlight a few takeaways thus far. You said that our inspection regime is the best in the world, and therefore our consumers, the public, has a high level of confidence in the American drug supply. I think that's very important to point out. It is getting better, the FDA inspections. But there are significant deficiencies that give the inspection regime a C grade. We talked about implementing new ways to augment the inspection regime, such as virtual inspections. Well, then the question becomes, are our drugs virtually safe? So I think we need to be very careful about such matters. We also have highlighted, and I think Dr. Harris did a very good job with this, that we have an uncompetitive playing field. When state-owned enterprises enter into partnership with American companies or other companies, that is a state-owned enterprise subsidized by the government. And again, we've had lax environmental and labor standards around the world that have resulted in incentives for American and other foreign-based companies to enter into places in the world that's hard to inspect. And this is the reality of where we are. So again, I want to highlight the importance of the possibility of a grade for companies and give one other comment. A long time ago, I used to be on the city council where I lived, and we had a very good individual who was in charge of doing spot inspections on businesses for safety standards. And we spoke about, rather than having a gotcha mentality, a collaborative mentality. The same applies to companies, though. Rather than those of us in government solely trying to ensure, as it's important, that companies are conducting safe and clean operations for the benefit of the public, which we must do. Why wouldn't a company be so disposed, particularly if they were given a grade, to say, FDA, please come see us. We'd like to voluntarily have you come in on a regularized basis or spot inspections whenever you like. And in other words, shift the dynamic where that company gives consumers, gives the public an added level of confidence that they are a cooperative player with inspection regimes. Are you finding anything like that in the private sector?
I don't. It certainly makes sense to be able to have incentive, a carrot rather than a stick. I don't have
both. Well, both, as I said, both.
Yeah, or both. Absolutely. I mean, there's no reason that you can't have both, but I don't have specific examples for you.
Well, I just wanted to raise this because if I'm a CEO or foreign entity watching this hearing, why wouldn't you have the disposition that I am going to guarantee, with the highest standard that's available, working with the United States government, that my drugs are safe and effective, thereby giving me a competitive advantage. And this also implies a certain country of origin labeling, or at least the grading concept that we discussed earlier.
Well, and based on past work that we've done, I mean, it's clear that there are a few bad actors that can ruin it for everybody. And so there are companies who are like, please come, I'm not one of those bad actors. So I would think that it would be worth the discussion.
Mr. Chairman, in the interest of time, I'll yield back. Thank you very much.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Fortenberry. I just have a couple of other questions. The COVID-19 has created a number of challenges for the FDA foreign inspections program, and the backlog in physical inspections is something that we've got to deal with for many years to catch up. The latest report from January recommends, and of course you indicate, one way for FDA to supplement the regular inspection activities is to utilize alternative inspection tools. Can you walk us through FDA's reliance on those alternative tools, how they've utilized them in the past, what recommendations you make, along with regular and more frequent physical inspections to incorporate them for the future work to eliminate the background? Now, about 10 years ago, Dr. Jerry Avarn, who was a professor at Harvard Medical School, suggested an alternative approach to ensuring the safety of imported drugs. According to an article in Nature, he said that the agency should exert its authority over the companies importing pharmaceutical ingredients rather than on the various manufacturers. This would put the onus of inspections on importers, thereby decreasing the FDA's financial and administrative burden. While I have some doubts, it is an intriguing suggestion. Can you share your thoughts on that with us?
It is an interesting suggestion, and we know on the food side that FDA does have experience with putting the onus on the importer. So for example, on the food side, with the Food Safety Modernization Act, they put third-party certifications or to help ensure the safety of it. The FDA now has the authority also to establish a voluntary qualified importer program, which helps to ensure the safety of the food coming in. And like we have with drugs, FDA can refuse any imported food if it's denied at a facility. So putting that onus on the importer is certainly something that FDA has experience with. And it's an interesting question that you pose and something that FDA could certainly consider.
Not that I'm suggesting it, but I was just wondering, this was something that was proposed 10 years ago, and I don't know whether or not it would be effective or not effective, but it is an alternative. Of course, the most obvious challenge would be for us to be able to do the physical inspections. With that, I'm going to yield back, and I will recognize Mr. Valadeo, who should be the final member in the queue. Mr. Valadeo.
I've got no more questions. I was just watching the rest of the hearing.
Is there any member who would like to ask any additional questions before we wrap up? If not, Dr. Dunnigan-McCauley, thank you so much for your testimony and for spending time with us today. Along with what we've discussed, we will also forward additional questions for the record, and we appreciate your diligence in getting your responses to us as soon as you can possibly do so. Any more comments from you, Mr. Fortenberry?
Only, Mr. Chairman, to thank you for your probing and thoughtful questions here and for running this hearing so smoothly, and to thank Dr. Dunnigan-McCauley. I think it was a very productive discussion.
Thank you for your participation, and thank you to all of the members who attended. And we understand that there were a couple of members that couldn't attend. We know that they had some serious conflicts. But also, let me take this opportunity to thank our staff who worked so hard to put this hearing together, and I think did an outstanding job. With that, this subcommittee hearing is adjourned.